for his 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for this hearing. And as you know, we need to continue to work through this as this issue is complicated and needs further analysis and additional input. And I'm going to have some questions later that I think will raise some issues that show that we're going to have to do some additional work. But am I correct that you're willing to commit to regular order after this hearing with a subcommittee hearing and a full markup hearing, Madam Chair?
Can you repeat the question,
Yes,
please?
ma'am.
I'm guilty of looking at my phone.
I understand. And the question is that, you know, as we work through some of these questions, they're complicated and so forth, and I'm just confirming that you are committed to regular order and that we'll
Yes,
have
and it was
subcommittee
another
markup
one
in
of our
full.
colleagues asked me that. This
Okay.
is regular order. We're having this hearing. We'll have a markup in the full committee. I believe we will have a markup in the subcommittee.
All right. I appreciate that very much
Sure.
because I do think it's important.
It
And
is.
that brings me to my first question, which is to you, Dr. Ippolito. I hope I said that close to right. I was not here earlier because we have two hearings going on and I was downstairs asking questions. The idea of intellectual property is so important to our country that it is enshrined in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8 grants to Congress the powers to promote, quote, the progress of science and useful arts, end quote, by providing inventors the limited but exclusive right to their discoveries, and authors. They're included as well. This applies to copyrights, patents, and trademarks similarly protected by Congress under the Commerce Clause, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. Together, they're all protected under the umbrella of intellectual property. Can you speak to the bills before us today and how they would undermine this important constitutional right, either through excessive taxation or seizure?
Right. So I think the key here is to understand what the kind of penalties are if you do not accept the HHS Secretary's price. And we're talking about either effectively all of your net revenue or literally the seizure of your intellectual property. And in terms of, I really do want to emphasize, we're talking about early stage investment, the uncertainty, it's long-term investments and so on. The fact that if you do not agree to some price that is very hard to predict 10 years from now, it's going to be a function of who's the president, who's the HHS secretary, what kind of political dynamics are, and so on. Plus, you know that they can also just take your intellectual property if you don't like the answer. Well, that's one heck of a disincentive to get into that business. And so in terms of, if you want to lower prices, fine. Just come out and say what the price is going to be for something, but don't tell me that the answer is, oh, we'll come up with a price in 12 years from now and see if you like it, and, we'll go from there, and if you don't like it, we'll take your intellectual property. Come up and say what the price is you want to pay. Otherwise, this kind of thing is so much uncertainty, it's going to be hugely detrimental to the firms that want to get into this kind of business.
Well, and you say it's detrimental to the firms getting in. Wouldn't it be natural for one of those companies to perhaps look for a different venue in which to place their company and maybe offshore it to someplace in Asia or some other location where they wouldn't have these restrictions?
Well, I think the first order that you would expect is, and I'll use a different example than the scooter sharing, but venture capital firms don't need to invest in pharmaceuticals. They can invest in anything they want to invest in, and that capital is mobile. And so my first order expectation would be that if you make it too unattractive to get into this business, well then fine, we'll invest in something else. We're not beholden to this market.
One of my other concerns that I hope will get worked out in subcommittee is that as we go forward with the markup is that I'm not sure we aren't violating on parts of this bill where they do a look back prior to the passage of the bill and start charging people. I'm not sure we're not violating both the civil aspects of ex post facto and possibly even bills of attainder. What say you?
It is true that if you're talking about the inflation caps, I think we would be retroactively taking back price increases back to, I think, as far as 2016. I don't know enough about the legal environment to know, but.
Well, it looks punitive to me. I'll have to do some more study on it before we get to subcommittee. This is our first hearing on this particular bill, so I look forward to that. I will say in the short time I have remaining that the whole system is complicated. We need more transparency. Dr. Anderson has said the drug companies are raising the prices and the PBMs can negotiate if there's more than one. He's right about that. On the other side of that coin, we heard drug manufacturers in a hearing last year or the year before say that when there is more than one, the PBMs hold them hostage and ask them to raise their list price so they can then give a bigger discount. The problem is when Dr. Fowler goes to pay his copay, he's paying it on the list price and not on the discount price that the PBMs have gotten after they asked the drug company to raise it. It's outrageous. There's a lot more work we can do together. working together bipartisan fashion, I think we can. This committee has always had a history of doing that.
And I want to emphasize one thing just on that point. The Part D benefit redesign does that. Part of what's encouraging that is a terrible incentive structure in Part D. This idea of high list to net spreads is what it's called. It's because you can use this benefit design to offload all these costs onto the federal government and then just stick it with a patient out of their pocket. It's a bad benefit design. So I know negotiation is a big part of this, but don't lose sight of the fact that there is a really good idea on the Part D benefit redesign here and in Senate Finance too.
The